Om Shanti everyone. My name's Brother Ken. I live in Brazil. I'm from Australia originally. And I've been in Gyan for over 45 years. And so I was one of the very first foreigners to come into contact with Brahma Kumaris in London, in a small little place in North London. And the three sisters in the center were Daddy Janki, Sister Genti, Sister Sudesh, and the vibration was fantastic. So I was attracted immediately. These people were doing what I was trying to do. They were practicing what I was trying to practice without saying so much. I must admit I didn't understand too much of the Gyan when I first come, but I was very, very attracted by the purity, the simplicity, the light. And so I decided after a few months I wanted to help in service, and I decided to go back to Australia, where I was born, and help in a small little centre that had started there. Now, on the way, after 3 months in Gyan, I decided to stop over in Bapdada. And there was like at the beginning of November of 75. I was the only foreigner there at the time, one of the first actually to get there. And of course, again, the vibration was powerful, very powerful. It was only 6 years since Brahma Baba had left his body, so the presence of Avyak Bapdada in the meetings, and of course, the powerful vibration in Baba's room attracted me immediately. Baba's room there was like, about a third of its present size. They knocked down a couple of walls in order to make it bigger because of the numbers of people that were going there to meditate. But it was also very simple, and I would say that was where I had my first real experience of Bapdada. Yes, we know that Baba's photo, which is there, I think it's practically been the same photo ever since those days. But very powerful vibrations emanate. And I was looking at Baba's picture, and it seemed like it was alive. And I had to blink my eyes a few times to check. And of course, it was just the photo, but the presence and the welcoming feeling. I was having the feeling, the sensation that I had arrived at my true destination. Now, in those days, Bapdada would come every couple of days, every 2, 3, 4 days. And it just so happened the day after that experience in Baba's room, Baba was coming. And I really didn't know what to do, but since I was the only foreigner there, they got me up to meet Bapdada. And the muli itself was all about having arrived at my destination. Baba was saying, telling the story of the moths, and he was saying there are some moths that plunge straight into the flame. There are some moths that circle around, but they don't have the courage to jump into the flame. And then there are some moths that go around a few times, then go away, then come back, go a few times around. Anyway, I knew what sort of moth I wanted to be. And when I met Baba the first time, he said I would go back to Australia and I would bring a bouquet of souls from there. And of course I didn't know what that meant, a bouquet of souls, what is that? But in any case, the next day I went back to Baba's room and I was sitting there. And I had the feeling that Baba was telling me or sending me the vibration, I don't know exactly, that I will accompany you. You will have my presence. When I got back to Australia, it was so important that because the nearest centre was Singapore, I think at the time, 6,000 kilometres away from Sydney. In those days, you You wouldn't make an international telephone call because the cost was too expensive. Letters also take 2 weeks to arrive, 3 weeks. But I had this feeling of Baba's presence, and it was so important because after a few weeks of being there, the small centre that had started earlier that year was closed because the sisters had to go somewhere else or the visas had run out. And so I did Inemolo at the time. She asked me if I could look after the things of the place. I said, okay. But after some time, it seemed like she really wasn't going to come back. So in January 1976, I was sitting there on the 18th of January. We organised a program with a few people that were interested to meditate in a national park overlooking a river on a big rock. So there was no centre, right? So I had such a strong inspiration, open a centre. And so I wrote to Daddy Prakash Mani and said, I'm going to open a centre. I didn't know what the protocols were, what the preparation was. But in very short time, that centre grew and grew. And at the end of that year, I had 16 souls with me, going back to Madhuban as a group of BKs, Brahmins. And so that was the bouquet. Baba showed how Trikaldashi he is. I mean, he knew, I didn't know. And so those initial years, I think I lost count of how many times I met Baba. I was checking now today how many of those meetings I'd actually written down. So it was about 30 written down, but there were so many meetings that we didn't even bother to, because we thought it would continue forever, so why write things down? Baba would always be there for us. And so I was just checking the things, and I remembered so many scenes about those meetings. There are many individual meetings, many group meetings too. As the double foreigners started to grow, Baba was very interested in sort of inspiring us to get things done. And I remember once in the history hall, after the Muli, he called a small group of foreigners there, and he said, I don't need you. And of course everyone was, what? You've called us here? What do you mean you don't need us? But he said, I could touch people's intellects and get things going and the golden age will happen. But I'm not going to the golden age. You are. I'm paraphrasing here. These weren't the exact words, but that was the sense of what Baba was saying. I'm not going there. You are going there. So you have to prepare your own kingdom. You have to do the things. Therefore, you have the chance to do service. And as my instruments. So there's that sort of very loving sort of chit-chat, I would say, happens so many times with small groups of foreigners. But the individual meetings were very special. Sometimes Baba would come in the meditation hall, sometimes in the history hall. I had the chance even to meet Bapdada in Baba's room with a very small group of people. And every meeting in those days was like a picnic. So at the end of the Muli, there were Toli, and Baba had this habit of throwing nuts, and so he'd get a handful of almonds and throw them, and of course everyone was scrambling to get their nuts from Baba, and it was such a beautiful scene. Those, of course, Baba was sitting almost at the same level as us. The Gadi was very small, and we were sitting on the floor in front of him like chatrak birds, trying to absorb what Baba was saying. And every time, I had so many signals from Baba. I remember once in those days I used to be so much in love with Baba. I used to write so many songs. So I wrote a very beautiful song, I think it was in 1979, called Oh Baba. And I sang it for Baba, and Baba called me up and he said, you should be a double musician. You play that instrument, but you also have to sing the song of Gyan. And then he said something very, it was very touching. He said, give me your talent, the musical talent, and I'll give it back to you purified. That meant my talents, whatever they are, Baba would use them to do his service. And I would just be an instrument. Just as I'm playing a guitar, let's say, Baba's playing me. So I had that really strong feeling. And in 1979, Daddy Prakash Maniji, and Didi Manmohiniji called me with Sister Jayanti translating. They'd received an invitation to send somebody to Brazil, and the person was guaranteeing support for 3 months. And because he was a bachelor, lived alone, probably they thought it was not appropriate to send a sister. So they asked me, and it turned out that I had made the initial contact with his brother at a Hatha Yoga conference in the south of India, so we knew each other. So they asked me if I'd like to go to Brazil. And immediately, if it's got to that stage, and Daddy and Didi are there asking me, would you like to go to Brazil? It was like, it was obvious. Baba wants me to go to Brazil. So the next day, Baba was coming. I went in front of Baba and I said, Baba, you want me to go to South America? And Baba said, yes. And then I asked him, have you got any special instructions? And he said, don't be too much heavy on the Srimat side. Be friendly. And through friendliness, those people will come closer. And then you can tell them about all of the, our principles and things like that. So it was a very sort of beautiful approach. And it was so appropriate. If you know Latin Americans, they're so friendly and so loving. But they're not very disciplined. So Baba was showing that he knew Latinos. And, well, I was comfortable because Baba wants me to go somewhere. So very quickly I went back to Australia. I got enough money together very shortly. I had a very good job. And then I went to Brazil. And in doing so, the first place I started out as was Colombia. And then I went by land from Colombia down to Bolivia. And from there, the last stretch, I took a flight because I wanted to know the different countries in South America. There's Colombia, then there's Ecuador, then there's Peru, then there's Bolivia and Brazil. That's probably the sequence that you do. So I got a feeling of what it was like. And then I arrived in Brazil. They'd set up everything very nicely. And in the meetings that I had with Baba subsequently, every year I'd go. Sometimes I'd stay for 2 months in Madhaban. The other day I was making calculation, how long have I actually spent in my life in Madhaban? And it comes to about 5 years. And so it's been a very beautiful journey. But in that beginning period, Baba gave so many blessings for the service there. In one meeting he said, put the local people in front because they know how to get things done. Keep yourself free and keep moving around. Then in another meeting he said, create a strong center like London. And then start to develop service in other places. Travel. He was always saying travel a lot. And once it was very surprising because I came in front of Baba and he said, you've got visa problems, don't you? And of course, he shows, not only, he says in the Maulis that he has a sort of a TV in the subtle regions. through which he watches his children. But, you know, he came and said, "You've got visa problem." I said, "You know, how do you know?" Of course he knows. And then he said, "Don't just go to the border." Because what I do every 3 months, because I was only there on a tourist visa, I had to go to a border of a neighboring country, get my passport stamped and come back again. So Baba said, don't just go to the border, go to the capital cities and get the service going in these other countries. And that's exactly how service started to develop in the nearby countries. Then later on, Daddy Janki sent me to Colombia to stay for 6 months to help to consolidate the service there, because until then it was just a Gita Pashala in somebody's Lokik house. And so little by little, that same method, put the local people in front, get them, because they know how to do things in their own country. He even said once, "You will always be a foreigner there, you know, even though you're an instrument, but you'll always be a foreigner." That many such meetings. And there was one time when Baba said, I just had made a tremendous effort to be tolerant towards a particular soul that year. And I came in front of Baba, and I was quite, happy that I'd made that effort. And Baba said to me, "Bahut thanks. Dhanyavad." That's exactly how he started off the greeting and the meeting. He said, "You have made the impossible possible." And I knew that he was referring to that particular effort that I made. So it's lovely to see that Baba's accompanying us. His subtle presence is there. He looks after us. He looks out for us too. And he, gives us the right instruction. So I know that many of you who are listening in have never met Baba personally. But that does not mean that Baba doesn't know you personally. Of course he does. I mean, if you went in front of Baba, he would definitely show that he knows something about your situation, about you, because you're his beloved child. And in these many meetings, Baba was there guiding. Daddy G, in preparing for her visit to come to Brazil, in 1984 she was going on a world tour. And so I asked Baba, anything we can do specially for Daddy G? What sort of programs? And Baba just gave a list of 5 or 6 titles, how to promote her. She's a Rajyogini. She's an angel of God. She's a messenger of peace. So Baba gave us all of these tips of how to promote her. And when Daddy G came to Brazil in 84, she realized that there were so many Brahmins there who hadn't been to Madhavan and probably couldn't ever get to Madhavan because the cost of the ticket was, huge. It was immense price because of the distance. South America is the furthest place from Madhavan. Chile, I believe, is the furthest country from Madhavan. And so Daddy was concerned that there are so many of Baba's children here who wouldn't come to Madhavan. And so the next year, 85, she sent Daddy Guzar. And again, in the early 85, I'm there in front of Baba, and I said, "Baba, thanks so much for agreeing to send Daddy Guzar." And again, I asked any special thing that we can do for her. He gave us several suggestions. And then I said, Baba, there are so many of your children in Brazil who can't come here to meet you personally. Can you meet them when you go to Brazil through Daddy Guzar? And Baba looked at me and said, Baba knows his own work, as if Baba knows what his role is, so I didn't push the topic. But such a love, such a concern for all of us. And that's the image that I have from Bapdada. And since it is Bapdada, Shiv Baba and Brahma Baba together, it's very easy to understand how the daddies and the dadas were so much in love with Sakar Baba, because it was the same, Shiv Baba and Brahma Baba together. Now, Bapdada is just Shiv Baba and Brahma Baba, but Brahma Baba had reached perfection. It's so easy to see how they're absolutely enamored by Baba when he was in the Sakar form. And so I just wanted to share these experiences, and of course they are part of my eternal fortune, and I'm so grateful that I've had the chance to have these experiences. And so it's just so lovely to remember them, and I feel so intoxicated just thinking about them. And looking over the messages that I've written down, people wrote down for me in all of these meetings. Maybe must have been around 80 times I met Baba, but I was not counting, so many times anyway. Baba is with us, and we are with Baba, and that's enough. Om Shanti.